A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
If you look at the total market capitalization of companies founded by alumni of a single military unit, the number is staggering. We are talking about over $160 billion. That is not just a successful incubator. That is an economic engine that rivals the output of entire nations, and it all comes out of a signals intelligence group in the Israeli Defense Forces. Today's prompt from Daniel is about Unit 8200, and it is a fascinating look at how a military intelligence wing became the primary architect of what we call the startup nation.
It really is one of the most unique sociological and technical phenomena in the world, corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been falling down this rabbit hole for a while now because the numbers just do not make sense if you look at them through a traditional venture capital lens. Usually, you expect a premier tech ecosystem to be built around a university like Stanford or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But in Israel, the elite tier of the tech world is almost entirely populated by people who spent their formative years in a windowless room in the desert or at the Urim Signals intelligence base. To put that $160 billion figure in perspective, if Unit 8200 were a country, its alumni-led economy would have a higher gross domestic product than Morocco, Slovakia, or Puerto Rico.
It is a bit of a paradox, right? You have this secretive, state-sponsored intelligence agency that is basically the equivalent of the National Security Agency in the United States, yet it is arguably the most successful business school on the planet. Daniel is asking us to look at this dual identity, the bridge between high-stakes military operations and the massive commercial success of companies like Wiz and Palo Alto Networks. And the timing could not be more critical. We are sitting here in March of 2026, and the landscape for these veterans has shifted dramatically over the last year.
The scale of it is what gets me. As of early 2026, we are looking at over 1,000 startups founded by veterans of 8200. And it is not just the volume, it is the density of the success. Since the events of October 7, 2023, the defense tech sector in Israel has essentially doubled. We are seeing over 300 active startups in that space alone as of this month. But to understand how we got here, you have to go back to before the state even existed. You have to look at the roots of what was then called Shin Mim 2.
Right, back when it was a small group of codebreakers during the British Mandate. Even then, the focus was on technical improvisation because they did not have the resources of a formal state. They were intercepting communications with whatever equipment they could scrape together. It was born out of necessity, which seems to be a recurring theme in the Israeli tech story.
That culture of improvisation is the DNA of the whole thing. After the state was formed, it became Unit 515, then Unit 848, and finally Unit 8200 after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. That transition in 1974 was the real turning point because the war was seen as a massive intelligence failure. The military realized they needed a quantum leap in signals intelligence and real-time data processing. They stopped looking for just soldiers and started looking for hackers, mathematicians, and linguists before those were even common terms in the civilian world. They realized that in the modern era, a 19-year-old with a keyboard could be more valuable than a battalion of tanks.
So, you have this state-subsidized training ground where 18-year-olds are given responsibilities that a mid-level manager at a Fortune 500 company would be terrified of. That seems to be the core of the startup bootcamp philosophy. You take these kids, you tell them the stakes are literally national survival, and then you tell them to solve a problem that has no existing manual. It is not just about learning to code. It is about learning to build the tools that allow you to code in an environment that is actively trying to kill you.
That is the key. In most military organizations, you have a very rigid chain of command. If you have a problem, you report it up and you wait for an order. In 8200, the culture is notoriously flat. If a 19-year-old corporal has a better way to bypass a firewall or optimize a satellite link than a colonel, the corporal is expected to speak up. They call it Chutzpah, which we often translate as audacity, but in an engineering context, it is more like a total disregard for the perceived impossibility of a task. It is the refusal to accept that a system cannot be breached or a problem cannot be solved just because the manual says so.
It sounds great in theory, but how does that actually translate to the commercial world? I mean, just because you can crack a code in a bunker does not mean you can build a user interface for a cloud security platform that a chief information officer in New York wants to buy. There has to be a bridge between the military objective and the market need.
The bridge is the specific type of problem solving. In 8200, they are trained to operate under extreme uncertainty with very little data. When you are building a startup, that is the exact environment you are in. You are trying to find a market fit for a product that does not exist yet. The unit also functions as a massive filter. They identify the top 1% of the 1% of Israeli youth through a series of grueling tests and cognitive assessments. They are looking for pattern recognition, lateral thinking, and the ability to stay calm under intense pressure.
We actually talked about the cognitive side of this back in episode 821, when we looked at how intelligence agencies use neurodiversity. The way 8200 identifies pattern recognition skills and high-level cryptanalysis talent is basically a state-run headhunting operation. They are finding the people who are hardwired for this stuff before they even get to university. If you are a recruiter for a venture capital firm, 8200 has already done the most expensive part of your job for you. They have spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours vetting the talent.
And once they are in, they are part of a cohort for life. This is where the cohort effect comes in, which is probably the most powerful part of the 8200 ecosystem. When these veterans finish their service, they do not just go their separate ways. They have the 8200 Alumni Association and the EISP, which is the 8200 social program and incubator. If you are a veteran looking to start a company, your first phone call is to a former commanding officer who might now be a partner at a venture capital firm, or a teammate who is now a senior engineer at Google. It is a self-reinforcing loop of capital and talent.
It is like the ultimate old boys club, but built on technical merit and shared high-stakes experience rather than just where you went to prep school. You look at the Wiz founders, Asaf Rappaport and his team. They were all together in 8200. They sold their first company, Adalam, to Microsoft for $320 million, and then they founded Wiz, which almost got acquired by Google for $32 billion last year in 2025. That kind of continuity and trust is unheard of in other tech hubs. You are not just hiring a chief technology officer, you are hiring someone you trusted with classified data when you were 19.
It is not just Wiz. You have Nir Zook at Palo Alto Networks, who was an early employee at Checkpoint, another 8200 powerhouse. You have Avishai Abrahami at Wix and Udi Mokadi at CyberArk. These are not just small exits. These are foundational companies in the global tech stack. As of June 2025, there were approximately 900 8200 veterans working at the highest levels of Microsoft, Meta, Google, and NVIDIA. They are essentially the nervous system of the global cybersecurity industry. If you use the internet today, you are almost certainly interacting with code written or overseen by an 8200 alumnus.
But this is where the conversation gets a bit more complicated, Herman. We are talking about a military unit, not a university. And that military unit is involved in offensive operations. You cannot talk about the success of the startup ecosystem without talking about the darker side of that talent pipeline. Daniel pointed out that this is not just about defensive firewalls. It is about the development of some of the most sophisticated cyber weapons ever seen. We have to talk about the ethical friction that comes with this.
The dual-use nature of the technology is the central ethical friction point. The same skills you use to protect a bank's cloud infrastructure are the skills you use to develop something like Stuxnet. For those who do not remember, Stuxnet was the incredibly complex worm discovered in 2010 that was used to sabotage Iranian nuclear centrifuges. It was a joint operation, but 8200's fingerprints were all over the code. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was also a weapon.
And then you have the commercialization of that weaponized mindset. The most controversial example is the NSO Group. The founders were veterans of the unit, and their Pegasus spyware has been at the center of massive human rights debates for years. Pegasus can essentially turn any smartphone into a total surveillance device without the user ever clicking a link. When that technology is sold to governments who use it to target journalists and activists, the startup nation narrative starts to look a lot more like a surveillance nation narrative.
It creates this reputational risk that we saw come to a head recently. In early 2025, there was that massive controversy with Microsoft Azure. They basically blocked the unit and associated entities from certain cloud services after reports surfaced about how mass surveillance and military targeting operations were being integrated with artificial intelligence. When a tech giant like Microsoft, which has historically been a huge partner for Israeli tech, starts distancing itself from the very people it used to hire by the hundreds, you know the landscape is shifting.
That Microsoft block was a watershed moment. It highlighted the tension between the globalized tech world and state-sponsored intelligence. For years, the origin story of being from 8200 was a golden ticket in Silicon Valley. It meant you were the best of the best. But as the geopolitical situation has become more volatile, especially post-October 7th, that military association has started to become a liability in certain markets. Investors are starting to ask, if I fund this company, am I also funding a shadow arm of a foreign military?
There was also that internal moral conflict back in 2014 that people often forget. 43 veterans of the unit signed a protest letter refusing to serve in reserve duty for operations against Palestinians. They specifically cited the use of private information gathered through surveillance for political persecution, things like using someone's sexual orientation or financial troubles to coerce them into becoming informants. It was a rare crack in the facade of the unit. It showed that even within this elite cohort, there is a deep unease about how these powerful tools are being used.
It is a difficult needle to thread. On one hand, you have a country that feels it is in an existential fight for survival, which justifies the most aggressive intelligence gathering possible in their view. On the other hand, those same individuals then enter the private sector and sell those capabilities, or versions of them, to the highest bidder. The line between a national security asset and a commercial product becomes incredibly blurry. We talked about this a bit in episode 713, regarding Israel as a global testing ground for AI cyber warfare. The tech is often battle-tested before it is market-ready.
I think about the Google Wiz deal falling through in 2025. There was a lot of talk about the price tag. $32 billion is a lot of money even for Google. But there was also a significant undercurrent of concern regarding the regulatory and reputational hurdles of acquiring a company so deeply rooted in the Israeli defense establishment during such a heated political climate. Even if the tech is superior, the baggage is heavy. If you are Google, do you want to explain to the European Union regulators how your new security architecture was developed by people who were simultaneously running offensive cyber ops?
And yet, the investment keeps flowing. Since the start of 2024, we have seen a massive surge in defense tech funding. It is almost like the market is bifurcated. You have the general consumer tech world that is wary of these associations, and then you have the hardcore defense and security sector that sees the recent combat testing of these technologies as a massive selling point. If your AI-driven drone software or your predictive intelligence platform was used successfully in a high-stakes conflict, a certain type of investor sees that as the ultimate validation.
It is the ultimate real-world stress test. But does that create a long-term problem for the startup nation brand? If Israel becomes seen primarily as a provider of offensive cyber and defense tech, does it lose its position as a broader tech hub? We have seen companies like Wix and Monday.com try to distance themselves from the military narrative to appeal to a global software-as-a-service market. They want to be seen as productivity tools, not defense contractors.
The neurodiversity factor is interesting here too, as a bridge. If you are hiring for the specific cognitive profiles we discussed in episode 821, those people are going to innovate regardless of the mission. If you give them a military mission, they build a surveillance tool. If you give them a commercial mission, they build a revolutionary database architecture. The genius of 8200 was not just the training, but the identification of that raw cognitive power. They are finding the pattern seekers and giving them a sandbox.
And the flat hierarchy. I cannot emphasize enough how much that matters for team building. When you look at why other countries have failed to replicate the 8200 model, it is usually because their military cultures are too rigid. You can buy the same computers and hire the same tutors, but if a junior analyst cannot tell a general he is wrong without ruining his career, you will never get the kind of breakthroughs that 8200 produces. That intellectual aggression is what makes a great startup founder. They do not wait for permission to disrupt a market.
It is a culture of intellectual aggression. You see it in the way Israeli startups negotiate. They are not looking for permission. They are looking for an opening. It is a very pro-growth mindset, but with this added layer of intense urgency that comes from the mandatory service and the constant state of alert. In the unit, if you fail to solve a problem, the consequences could be a national tragedy. In the startup, if you fail, you just lose your Series A funding. That perspective makes the pressures of Silicon Valley seem almost trivial by comparison.
I think the takeaway for anyone in tech, whether they agree with the politics or not, is the power of a mission-driven cohort. When you put highly talented people together under high pressure with a clear objective and give them the autonomy to fail, you get extraordinary results. The 8200 model is essentially a state-sponsored version of what Y Combinator tries to do, but with higher stakes and a much longer time horizon. They are building a network that lasts 40 years, not just a 3-month demo day.
But you also have to look at the risks of that dual-use technology. If your startup success is predicated on skills or code that originated in the classified environment, you are always one policy shift away from losing your global market access. The 2025 Microsoft Azure controversy should be a warning to every founder in this space. Your origins matter to your customers, and in a multipolar world, those origins can become a cage. If the world splits into different tech spheres, where does an 8200 startup sit?
It is the paradox of the unit, the very thing that makes them the best in the world. Their deep integration with the most advanced state intelligence operations is the thing that makes them a target for international regulators and activists. They are the ultimate insiders who are increasingly being treated like outsiders in the global tech commons. We are seeing a decoupling. You will have a tier of companies that are explicitly defense-oriented and will operate within a specific ecosystem of allied nations, primarily the United States and Europe. And then you will have a second generation of founders who are very careful to scrub their military history from their corporate identity.
So where does this go from here? We're in 2026, the defense tech sector is booming, but the ethical and geopolitical pressure is higher than it has ever been. Does the 8200 pipeline eventually dry up as people move toward more purely civilian tech, or does it just become more specialized?
I think it becomes more specialized. The days of using your unit number as a marketing tool might be coming to an end for anyone who wants to sell to the general public or to neutral markets. But the underlying engine, the identification of talent and the culture of Chutzpah, that is not going anywhere. It is too deeply embedded in the Israeli economy. $160 billion is a lot of momentum to stop.
It is a fascinating evolution. From a ragtag group of code breakers in the 1940s to a global tech powerhouse that can move the needle on the NASDAQ. It is a testament to what happens when you prioritize human capital and intellectual freedom within a military framework, even if the results are often controversial. It forces us to ask, can you have the innovation without the weapons? Or is the high-stakes environment of the military the only thing that can forge that kind of talent?
It really is the central question of the startup nation. And for our listeners, I think the lesson is about the environment you create for your teams. Are you encouraging that flat hierarchy? Are you allowing for that chutzpah? Or are you stifling it with bureaucracy? You do not need a military budget to adopt the 8200 mindset of operating under uncertainty. You just need to trust your 19-year-old a little bit more.
Well, maybe leave out the surveillance of civilian populations part, but the engineering philosophy is definitely worth a look. This has been a deep one. Daniel always manages to find these topics that sit right at the intersection of technology, history, and raw power.
He certainly does. There is so much more we could dive into, especially the technical specifics of the Urim base and the way they handle satellite intercepts, but we should probably save that for another time. If people want to understand the modern digital battlefield, they have to understand 8200. It is the place where the line between soldier and CEO finally disappeared.
If you want to dig deeper into the Israeli tech scene, you should check out episode 991, where we talked about the evolution of the kibbutz and how that communal structure actually paved the way for the startup culture. It provides a lot of the social context that makes 8200 possible. The transition from the communal dining hall to the high-tech bunker is shorter than most people think.
That is a great connection. Both systems rely on a total commitment to the group and a shared sense of mission.
All right, let's wrap this one up. We have covered the origins, the market impact, the ethical friction, and the future of the unit. It is a complicated legacy, but you cannot deny the results. $160 billion speaks for itself, even if the voice is sometimes controversial.
No, you cannot deny it. It is the most successful experiment in human capital in the last century.
Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping us on track today and making sure we did not get too bogged down in the technical weeds.
And thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. They make this whole collaboration possible.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying these deep dives, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation.
We will be back next time with another of Daniel's prompts. Until then, keep digging into the systems that run our world.
See ya.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show.